Hey, what's up guys? This is Matt with the Movement System. In this video, I'm gonna show you why your hamstrings are tight and 3 exercises to fix it. As a doctor of physical therapy and a strength and conditioning specialist, over the last 10 years, I've worked with a ton of athletes who feel like their hamstrings are always tight. And a lot of times they've been stretching for years and it hasn't helped. So in this video, I'm gonna break down why that's occurring, the basic anatomy and biomechanics of what's going on at the hamstring, and then I'm gonna give you my 3 go-to exercises to address it. If you do wanna just skip right to the exercises and skip the anatomy, then go to this timestamp. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into the hamstring anatomy and biomechanics. So the hamstrings are a multi-joint muscle. They cross the hip and they cross the knee. So they're gonna be responsible for both knee flexion and hip extension. Now, with the hamstring muscle group, we can kind of think about it as either concentrically shortening or eccentrically lengthening. So if we're going through a concentric contraction, we're shortening the hamstring and we're either extending the hip or bending the knee or both. So for example, when we do an RDL, we're lengthening and then we're shortening the hamstring. Similarly, when we do a hamstring curl, we're going through a concentric shortening contraction and an eccentric lengthening contraction. Now, a lot of people have a pretty good grasp on what's going on during exercise, but there's actually some really interesting aspects of just static posture that change your experience of hamstring tightness. Let me explain. So just to maintain our posture, if we're just standing up, whatever our natural resting standing position is, we have to figure out how do we balance our body here. And some people naturally tilt their hips a little bit more forward. And when this is the case, what happens is our hamstring lengthens. Specifically, every 5 degrees of anterior pelvic tilt, when the hips tilt forward, lengthens our hamstring by 1 centimeter. Now, of course, when we lengthen the hamstring, we're going to experience more tension in that muscle. So the way that I kind of term this or help understand this is that when we're anteriorly tilted and we're lengthening the hamstring, that hamstring in its resting state is in what we call an eccentric orientation, or there's just a certain amount of kind of tension on it. Now, interestingly, you could probably tell though that as that hamstring's lengthened at rest, it's not tight and short, it's tight and long. So stretching it more and trying to increase length isn't really the solution. Rather, we have to develop strategies to tilt the hips back and provide some neuromuscular input to this hamstring region and try to neutralize that relationship between the hamstrings, the core, the back, and the hip flexors as well. So if you're experiencing chronic hamstring tightness and stretching isn't working, chances are this is what's going on, and I'm gonna give you 3 exercises to fix it. All right, our first go-to exercise is going to be a heel elevated goblet squat. This is going to reinforce what we call the stack, where our hips are going to be stacked above our rib cage. Basically, we're teaching our body to move up and down like an elevator because there's a lot of kind of anterior posterior movement going on in normal daily life and in our length tension relationships at the hips and the core. So with our goblet squat, you can start unweighted or you can just add a light weight here at the chest level. But what we're gonna work on is first just kind of tilting the hips back and then tilting the hips forward. We wanna find kind of a neutral position here where we're not overly tucked forward and we're not overly extended. Once we find that neutral position, like an elevator, we're gonna move up and down. So we're gonna initiate the squat with knee flexion, have our eyes forward toward the horizon, and then just sink the hips down towards behind the heels. So this position, we just wanna be able to work on going from here to here consistently and develop a lot of strength in this position, balancing anterior core recruitment with our hamstring recruitment. I'd recommend starting with sets of either 30 seconds or 10 slow controlled reps, about 2 seconds on the way down, 1 second pause, 2 seconds on the way up. Now, if you don't have wedges, you can elevate your heels on a platform, though I do think wedges are better because it does give you that full foot contact. Now, if you don't want to use wedges or heel elevation at all, we can still reinforce this same principle with either a split squat or a step up. So exercise number 2 is going to be a unilateral variation of kind of working on that elevator motion, either with a split squat or a step up. Same idea, we're holding that dumbbell at chest level. We're finding a split stance, tucking the hips under, not aggressively, kind of finding that mid-range, and then moving up and down like an elevator. So up and down like an elevator, eyes forward, and then balancing that anterior core recruitment with some posterior pelvic tilt and control at the hips. All right, and then here's our third exercise to restore that relationship between the anterior core and the hamstrings and start to give ourselves a reduced experience of tightness through the hamstring. A lot of people go here first, but I do like the goblet squat or the split squat to get more of a significant training effect, but this can be a good exercise to learn the basic movements at the hip and again, reinforce that anterior core recruitment with deep breathing. So basically, you're gonna put your heels on a box and then you're gonna lay it on the ground like this. From here, what you're gonna do is you're gonna drive your heels down while tilting your hips back like this. From here, I just like to do deep exhales while kind of slowly peeling the back of the hips up off the ground. Now, honestly, a lot of different variations of this same exercise can work similarly well. You'll see single leg variations. You'll see variations where your feet are on the wall and you're kind of trying to drag your feet down the wall. And you may even see reaching upward toward the sky or reaching backwards. Each of these have slightly different benefits in bias certain positions, but overall, building that neuromuscular awareness of pelvic tilt position, driving hamstring recruitment, and connecting your hamstring activation with your core work all work together to do the same thing, which is to, again, change that length tension relationship that's going on between your hamstrings, your core, and your pelvic position. So if you're experiencing hamstring tightness and stretching isn't helping, work on driving some neuromuscular stimulus to the hamstrings, learning to posteriorly tilt and stack the hips in your exercises. And I would consider, at least temporarily for a few weeks, substituting out big extension sensitive movements like back squat for a stacked variation, at least in the short term. Learning and practicing movements with that stacked rib cage and hip position is kind of like turning your computer off and back on again. A lot of times it works. I would keep some of that in your training year round, but prioritize it whenever you're experiencing that hamstring tightness where you feel like that length tension relationship isn't where it needs to be right now. If you're a coach and you want more biomechanics-based strategies in your toolbox, check out our brand new course, The Anatomy and Biomechanics of Movement. I'll leave a link in the description below. It goes over how to understand concentric and eccentric orientation of different muscle groups, as well as the associated movement strategies. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.